All right, quiet you mouth. Hello, everyone. Welcome back. Hopefully, we all forgot how to code over the weekend. um, cool. So let's talk about Module 2. So a few things that we expect you to be able to do by the end of this set of experiences. So by the end of this mod, you should be able to create simple APIs using Rails, build websites with HTML and CSS, demonstrate basic programming proficiency with JavaScript, create and manipulate DOM nodes, retrieve data using fetch, describe how the web and internet work, and submit data using forms. This is a fucking huge mod. This mod is probably bigger than mods 3 and 4 put together. Just heads up. There's a lot in it. But like, if there's one mod that you are gonna focus hard and like white knuckle your way through, it's this one. At the end of this, you are a full stack developer. And we said mods 3 and 4 just enriching that. You make better front ends, you make more secure back ends, all that kind of stuff. But like, if mod 1 was like getting used to programming and making things and getting some vocabulary, this is probably like a more rubber hits the road kind of mod. So just like last time, I'm going to demonstrate some things for you and kind of give you an idea of where you need to be at the end of next week. And also hopefully give you a conceptual framework to sort of put this mod in. So let's start with that. Let's start with a picture you are going to see an awful lot of times over the next 12 weeks. Client server. So the general shape of this is client makes a request to a server, server responds. This is like full stack development in a nutshell. A client is somebody who asks for something. A server is something that supplies something. So to make that a little bit more concrete, we can call this a browser and this an API. So in my browser, I go, hey, give me some data. And the server goes, cool, here it is. That loop, that's fundamentally all of full stack development. So if we flesh out this diagram a little bit more, then we might say that we've got like a database here. And so when I ask for this server, it goes, cool, I know where that is. Let me dog.all and get everything out of the database. And when I get those back, I'm going to give them back to you. All the stuff we were doing in mod 1 was like kind of this part of it. One of the first things we're going to add is this part of it. How do we, like not on the command line, but over a network, ask for some of this data? So these little pieces right here, important part of that. HTTP request, HTTP response. I would like this data. Here it is. We use HTTP to send that back and forth. These are two different computers. They talk to each other over HTTP. I have a database over here. Server knows how to talk to the database. Gives that back to browser. Questions about this conceptual model so far? Yeah, Finn.
The API is not a database, it's just a messenger that you communicate with and it talks to the database.
Exactly. Browser can't talk to the database directly, at least you certainly don't want it to. We gotta have a middleman. Middleman is gonna make sure that I can only say the things to the database that the server says are okay to say to the database. The server's gonna manage who's allowed to say what to the database, that kind of stuff. It's also going to like aggregate stuff in the database, decorate it, make it look the way the client wants, all that kind of stuff. Think of this like the database's manager, it's his agent. like in like the Hollywood kind of sense. Please don't ask me questions directly. Just go through my agent. I'd really appreciate it. That's the database. Good question. What else? Questions about this model?
There can be multiple server APIs, right?
Absolutely. So we could just as easily, so if that's the client, we can have more than one server. Absolutely. Each of these servers can also talk to other servers. And in this case, this becomes a client because it's asking for something, this other server is giving it back. Wild. Cool. Other questions about our conceptual model here?
So in that second, the one that you just drew,
Mm-hmm.
you'd be asking the server to ask something
Yep.
to the other server.
Super common example. This is Facebook. This is my API. This is the browser. So I want your email from Facebook. Client doesn't ask Facebook that directly. Client asks the server, which asks Facebook, because Facebook gives me like a super secret key that will let me ask those kinds of questions, and I don't want the client to have it. So I keep it in this computer, but that means that this guy needs to make the request on this guy's behalf. Other questions conceptually about what we're doing here? One other thing in this diagram is we're going to have another kind of server over here. I call this a file server. File server is in charge of storing HTML, CSS, JavaScript, images, videos, files, just files. It's like Google Drive, something like that, except I can make an HTTP request and go, yo, can you give me one of these files? Sure enough, here you go. Also an HTTP request, also an HTTP response. Well, usually what I'm getting is HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. Gets down to the browser goes, I know what to do with these files. Starts running an application. One of the things that the application is telling you to do is get data. And so it asks for some data, does whatever it does with it. There you go. There is full stack web development in one diagram. Every app, big or small, tends to kind of look like this. More questions? Cool. Let's start playing with these standards a little bit. First one I want to talk about is websites. This one's probably the farthest away from the stuff that you've done already. This will be making these files so that the browser can get them. Over here. Give me a noun. What's this site all about? Balloons. It's called Balloon Party. Come on. Monday for everyone. All right, nothing up this sleeve, nothing up this sleeve. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to make a front end. Also, you don't have to like code along with this or anything like that. You don't even really need to take notes. Just trying to get a big picture of where we're going the next 2 weeks. So in this front end, I'm going to make 3 files: index.html, app.js, app.css. So now I have 3 empty files in this front end folder. This is what's going to end up being served up from this file server. So if I go into this index file and type some magic incantations, I'll get a web page. Probably did this as part of the pre-work. You might have done this in self-study or in another life. It's changed a little bit, but honestly, not that much. So we're going to get our style sheet linked up here. Give it a title, balloon party. And tell it a character set to use. Sweet. And now if I type some stuff here, I can get this to show up on the page. So we'll say that that's a balloon party, and maybe I keep track of a list of balloons. Neat. So, how about I serve up this? I'll say ClientServer, which is an application on your computer you can install that will essentially allow you to run a file server off of your computer. It'll only be visible on your computer, but it kind of functions the way you'd expect. And hey, we got a web page. You can even style that. If I go into that CSS file, I can say that I want all LIs to be list style none. That should make the bullets go away. I also want them to have a padding left of 0. Oh, is it margin left? Oops. Oh, it's the entire list. Padding left of 0. Cool, that brings that in. I also want to give each of these some breathing room around it, and maybe a box shadow of 2 pixels. 1 pixel, 3 pixels, and then kind of a light one. And then max width, 200 pixels. And then margin bottom, 2 rems. All right, cool. So just web pages. Go back to our standards. Building websites with HTML and CSS. Kind of what that's all about. We put all of those files on a file server. When you type a URL into your browser asks for those files, gets them back, knows what to do with those file types, makes them show up on the page. Awesome. Now, problem is, what happens when I don't want to hard code in red balloon and blue balloon? I want to be able to add them dynamically. I want you to be able to add them and me to be able to see them without you recoding my web page. That's where the API comes in. So we'll say Rails new balloon API package-API. And then I need to be running the right version of Rails. So I do that again. And this is all Ruby based, and it is magical. This is like, remember how Active Record, it was like, oh wow, I don't need to write all this SQL. Oh cool, it manages all my database stuff for me in these like little teeny tiny commands. Active Record is a part of Rails, and oh boy, there's a lot more where that came from. It's a lot of like memorizing some magic, but holy shit, once you have that magic down, like a couple words gets you an awful lot of cool stuff. Pori Hemplo. I can, let's see, Balloon API. I guess I should have called that Backend. Coulda, woulda, shoulda. Move Balloon API to Backend. Cool. I'm going to go over to Backend and Rails S, and I am serving Rails API. If I go to localhost 3000, cool, Rails is working. So the thing I'm trying to do is make it so that I can store a collection of balloons. Neat. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to Rails generate model balloon. And what it did is it made a bunch of files for me. One command generates all the files that I need, wires them all up, all that kind of stuff. If I go over to the migration it just made for me, hey, we just saw these. I can say, these have a t.string name, all right? So these have a t.string name, and then I can do Rails DB migrate, and cool, I have a balloon stable now. Wow, that was easy. You notice I didn't have to like make an environment file. I didn't do any, like Rails does all that shit for you. So sorry, not sorry, you learned how to do all that. And if I go over to, hey, it even made the balloon class for me. Everything's all wired up. So then I can do Rails generate controller balloons. And over here, if I want to list all the balloons in my database, make a method called index. I get all the balloons. And then I say, cool. Here's your balloons, yo. Done. Now, to be able to like access this over HTTP, I go over to the router and say, cool, if you send an HTTP GET request to balloons, why don't you go ahead and send that request on over to balloons index. Neat. So let's hop over to seeds and seed up some boons. Balloon.create name green balloon, purple balloon, and then run my seeds, Rails DB seed. It is so. Now from the browser, I go to localhost 3000/balloons, a green balloon and a purple balloon. Made an API. Ta-da. So now any website can make a request to that URL and get this data back and then do something with it. It's pretty cool. So going back to our standards, simple APIs using Rails. All right, now on our front end, I am tired of hard coding these in here. So what I'm going to do instead is call this balloons. And in that JavaScript file that I haven't linked to yet, script. I'm going to say, hey, why don't you fetch me localhost 3000 balloons. It's going to give me back the response as a raw HTTP response. I want you to pull some JSON out of that. That's the JSON that I wrote back. I want you to turn it back into regular JavaScript. And then I want to take the balloons that come out of that. And how about I just make them show up in my browser real quick? So now, when I load up this page, oh, gotta turn on cores. So I mentioned that there's a lot of magic incantations. This is one of them. Some of this stuff is going to be fake it till you make it. It's like, if you have to understand every part of all of this, we're going to be here a lot longer than 15 weeks. And then restart my server. Oops. You also need to put the middleware in. There we go. There we go. All right, so now if I do that, I see some balloons show up in my console. Sick. So if we're tracking along here, I got HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. It is running in my browser. I made a request to my API. It got balloons out of the database and has given them back to me. Now, I don't know about you, but I don't browse a whole lot of websites just looking at shit in the console. I want it to show up on the page. Oh, by the way, I retrieved data using fetch right there. So next thing that I want to do is I'm going to make an element dynamically, programming wise. So I'll say document.createElement li, and then I want to make some balloons with balloons.map. Hey, weird, it's like that's in every language. And say that li.text content is balloon.name. That's what I call it, right? Balloon.name, return the li. We've got some balloons here, and now for each balloon, I want to get the UL out of the page. And add my balloon to each of them. So I'll say append balloon. And then when I do that, balloons.map's not, you're not a function. Oh, I know why. Hey, green balloon and purple balloon showing up on the page. Sick. The thing I just did right there was create and manipulate DOM nodes. I also demonstrated a little basic programming proficiency with JavaScript. So I made an API, I made a website, I've JavaScripted it, I made some elements, I got some data back using fetch. That diagram is about where we're going to go with web and internet. Last thing you need to be able to do by next Friday is submit data using forms. So let's say I want to be able to add a balloon. Pretty reasonable thing to want. So I make a form. And in this form, I'm going to have an input that is called balloon. I'll call it name. And I'll give it a submit button. And we'll call it add balloon. And give it a method of post. And we're going to send this to the API also. And we're going to say that by saying, hey, by the way, whenever you're submitting this form, it should go to localhost 3000 balloons. All right, did it show up on the page? It did. Looks like shit though. So we can go back over to our CSS and say that inputs should be display block and have some padding around them. All right, it's looking a little bit better. And while we're at it, why don't we give them a little bit of margin too? All right, there's our form. I can fill out a balloon name and add the balloon, and it will send an HTTP request over to the API. API needs to be able to accommodate that though. So if I go back over here, go back to those routes, and say, if somebody sends a post request to balloons, why don't you send that over to balloons create? And then if we make a balloons create, then we're going to say balloon create. The name comes in from the request, and it's called name. And once you've added it, I want you to redirect back to localhost 8080, that same web page we were just on. This one's a little bit hacky. We're only going to do it for mod 2. We'll learn a better way to do that in mod 3. But this should work. Let's see if it does. Shout out a color. Blue. Blue balloon. Oops. Oh, it's because I'm... That's a problem. What am I actually running this? 3001. That's why. I'll bet it added it though. One. There we go. Okay. Yeah. Yeah, there it is. So let's see if the redirect works right this time. Yellow balloon. There's yellow balloon. Fucking cool. So that's submitting data using forms. We've talked about web and internet. We've retrieved data using fetch. We've made DOM nodes. We have done a little bit of Gerbil script. We've built websites. We've made APIs. That's mod 2. You can do all those things. You are all right for the code challenge and all right for the mod 2 project and all right by me. So one more time, because like this is probably one of the most critical takeaways of the program is this diagram right here. I typed in a URL. It went to the file server at that URL, gave me back these files. Ran those files. One of the instructions in the files was to ask for some data from this API. That looked that up, got it back, gave it back to the browser. Browser goes, cool, I know what to do with that data. I'm gonna make some list items out of it, make them show up on the page. There's also something where we had a form sends out an HTTP request, adds some stuff to the database, and then tells the browser to go somewhere else. What questions do you have? Yeah, Miriam.
Data entered into the form on the website, does that persist?
So yeah, if I go over here, hard refresh. Oops, that's not the button. Hard refresh, there it is. And if I deployed this, you'd see it too. In fact, you can see it if you're enterprising and want to go to, it'll show up on the screen. If you go to this URL in your browser, you'll see all those balloons also. But that's because like we're all on the same network. We're using the same Wi-Fi connection. That's the IP address of my computer on this network, and that's the port that I'm hosting it on. If you type all that in, you'll see them too. Cool. What else? Yeah. Yes. Keep it down, keep it down, keep it down. So, from the beginning, we made a website, made these 3 files, did some website-y kinds of things, have some elements on there, have the form. We are importing a JavaScript file, we're importing a CSS file. CSS file is dictating the appearance of the page. The JavaScript file is dictating the behavior of the page. And so what this is doing, asks for some balloons from the server. And then when it gets them back, it adds each of them to the page dynamically. We didn't type in each of those balloons. We got them back from another computer. We're making them show up on the page. That's us adding them to the page. That's all. That's about all we need to do with JavaScript, is be able to do some things like this. On the back end, we can do 2 things. We can list balloons, we can add balloons. This is listening for those HTTP requests and sending the request to the places that it needs to go. This is telling us how we do that. This is how I list balloons. I just use good old active record balloon.all, and then I send it back down. When I create a balloon, I use active records create method. Make a new balloon, it handles adding all that to the database, and then essentially refreshes the page. Tells the browser, by the way, you should refresh now. And then other stuff we did. We have this model. I didn't have to type this though. Rails just made that for me. I've got the migrations. That's the only thing that's in my table. Name. And yeah, that's all of it. Seems like a lot, but remember on Tuesday 3 weeks ago, and you're like, holy shit, how will I ever understand what a class relationship is ever? And then we all got there. Same thing with this. This one is a lot, but I don't know, we've pretty consistently gotten people here 2 cohorts now. So, ta-da. Oh, one other thing that's like relevant, especially as you're like poking around Learn, almost everything that we do in Learn is in mod 3. There's like very, very, very few things that we do in mod 2 on Learn. And the reason for that is the official like Flatiron mod 2 has a lot of things that we honestly just don't need. is like building servers from scratch. There's server-side templating, which is kind of died off like 5 years ago. Form generators, like a bunch of things that aren't very common in the industry now. And if we only have 15 weeks, like wouldn't make my cut for how we would spend that 15 weeks. And so most of the stuff we're doing is actually Mod 3 stuff, which buys us like a lot of Mod 3 to dive deeper into stuff that I think will make you more employable. But that's the reason that you're spending a lot of time in Mod 3 on Learn. And when we first did this, the last cohort to do the old school Mod 2 was the 11xers, and I think the Aurelians were the first people to do new Mod 2. And I was like, 11xers, this like sound like a reasonable change? And they're like, oh, why did you waste 3 weeks of my life with those templates? So the people that did the old school way also think that you should do it this way. So this is what you get for giving us survey feedback, is we try to make the program better. Yeah, Ben.
Is part of Mod 2 kind of getting to know JavaScript? Like,
Yes.
Yeah, okay.
Definitely. You will be minimally proficient in JavaScript by the end of this mod. And then we're going to spend a lot of Mod 3 getting more proficient. Yeah?
So the database is like on a different
Almost always. So the way that you guys did it in Mod 1 is it was just in a file, is in that SQLite file. That's not common. The way that you usually do it is there's an entire extra, I should put a blue box around this, an entire extra server that you're communicating with that all it does is run that database. And it's technically on a separate computer from your API. It's not the only way you can do it, but that one's a lot more common. And Active Record just kind of hand waves around that, so you don't actually have to manually deal with it ever. Cool, what else? Questions about anything we're doing in Mod 2? They talked about the hackathon this morning? Cool, so that's next week. That's also a part of Mod 2. Probably 2-ish of you and 2-ish Hashketeers will be on a team for a day, and they'll use their newfound React skills that they're learning about in their Mod 4 overview talk, and y'all will build a Rails API, and you'll work together and build a project in a day. Be pretty cool. It's, I think, the 5th time we've done that, and it's a hit. It's a highlight of the program. And then when y'all are in Mod 4, it'll be the exact same thing again, and you'll be the big kids. But a lot of people say that that particular project makes a lot of this make sense. But that'll be next Tuesday. Cool, what else?
If you could go back to the list of like things in Mod 2
Mm-hmm.
and apply weight.
Sure. Oh, good
to
question.
each thing.
The absolute most important things in here, APIs with Rails. I would say these 3 are probably the most important. I would say these 3, DOM nodes, fetch, and forms, are like the next most important. And being able to accurately describe how the web and internet work, we've been shooting about 50-50 on whether or not people have been able to reliably do that at the end of Mod 2, and that's okay. It's a bigger concept than it seems on the surface. And so if that one, if you're not super solid on that until the end of Mod 3, I won't lose any sleep over it. But I would say that these 3 are probably twice as important as these in terms of like what will make me lose sleep if you can't do it.
How's the setup? How did you open it? Like, I don't know if this is me, but it was too fast. I don't even know how.
You're not supposed to be able to do any of these things right now. This is the same as the Mod 1 overview. So I don't expect anybody to do a single step of this right now. That's what we're doing for the next 2 weeks. And so a good place for everybody to start with Rails is, for this simple APIs using Rails, is Damon has released some materials. Shit, is this really all we have in here? Fuck. So my goal for the day is to fill out all these resources for Mod 2 and 4. That was definitely one of those like, that sounds like 3 weeks from now's problem. And now here we find ourselves. So I'll give you some more resources of these. We have lots of them. And shut up. You guys ever see that Office episode with Woof?
Yeah.
I get woofed a lot. Shut up. There we go. So I'll give you some more resources for these. I believe Kat is doing a Rails lesson in the afternoon. All that should be plenty to get you started on this. We go intentionally very lessons light on the first day, so you get a chance to read through stuff, wrestle with stuff, and hopefully come into tomorrow with a lot of questions so we can do same stuff we normally do. I'd also highly recommend make groups, pairs, work with each other on this. And as a like rough timeline kind of thing, I would expect, let's see, we're probably going to spend a couple days on this, couple days on this, and then JavaScript, DOM nodes, and fetch, these will all kind of run together. We'll sort of be talking about all of these at the same time. And we'll probably spend 3 or 4 days on all of that. We'll tack forms on probably mid next week. And then also web and internet, that kind of gets woven throughout this. But yeah, we'll probably be doing APIs for a couple days at least. Other questions about what's happening in Mod 2? Yeah, Parker.
You still use some Ruby, right?
Absolutely. So Rails is all Ruby. So if we take a look at that controller that I was writing, these are just methods, classes, all that kind of stuff. You'll notice that you tend to do an awful lot less data manipulation than you did in the first mod. So no maps, no selects, no any of that kind of stuff, but dramatically fewer of them than when we didn't have any of the cool Rails stuff that just does all of that for us. Yeah, Finn.
A description of the rubric of the project so we can start thinking about what kind of apps might be appropriate.
Sure. So your Mod 2 project is something with the front end, something with the back end. You need to be able to do, let's see, no, you don't have to do all the CRUD methods. Basically, you need to make some app that has this shape. It's got to have some HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. It needs to have, I'd say, a couple of like database tables that you're working with that work with each other in some way. And you need to be able to at least add data to it and make it display on the page. I would say that's kind of the minimum. If you're really trying to push on it, I would say figure out a way to also delete things out of your database and update things from your database. Yeah, that's a Mod 2 project. But something that kind of looks like that. And your co-challenge also next week is something that kind of looks like that. It's you need to be able to list a bunch of things from a database. You need to be able to like click on a single thing and then go to just that one thing. So if you have a list of things, you click on one, you get a special page just for that one. And you need to be able to add something. That's the co-challenge. There's no styling as far as I know on that. But it's otherwise basically all the things I just did. It's a co-challenge. Cool, what else? Yeah.
I'm really afraid of like forgetting Ruby because of Rails. Is that
No, it's,
Am I being crazy or is that?
I wouldn't say crazy, but all of this is still Ruby. It's not as in depth with it, but the thing is, like, it's not important to know Ruby. It really isn't. What's important to know is programming. And so if you look at what I did in this JavaScript file, oh, what do you know? There's maps and this goofy shit with the fat arrow. That's kind of like a block. A lot of these concepts are pretty much the same in all of them. And that's why you saw all those like capstone pieces that were in Python and Node and all this other kind of stuff, because once we know what a map is, you know what it is in every language. And so the differences between them become mostly syntax rather than like meaning. So I wouldn't worry too much about losing your Ruby chops. Cool, what else? Cool, bangarang. You guys have a lesson at 1? Cool. Between then and now, I'm going to slack out a couple things for you guys to read. But elsewise, go and be well.